Good morning, Tom. And if you're watching on RMG TV, Tom Hamilton is in the hat.
Morning, Rover.
How are you?
Good, and you?
And this is a big deal. I think that the games are now going to be heard on FM because AM. I was talking about this earlier. And I'm not trying to, to knock AM, but it's hard to. Well, I am, right? It's hard to listen to, really. I mean, I have to crank that up. Maybe I have bad hearing.
No,
you have to crank it up. It sounds all muffled
in a tunnel.
That's right.
Actually, you can hear Hammy with a tin can string. You don't even need a signal.
How long have you been doing the Indians
This
games?
will be 24.
24 years.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the last 23 I've sucked.
Yeah. Well, no. Have you? Does it ever get boring to do it? Nah, come on.
Well, I mean, there are games where you're like, well, I'll be glad when this is over.
Yeah.
But
seasons too, where you're like, oh, please.
You know what? I've always said it. It beats working. I never want to get a real job again. I'm sure you guys feel the same way about yours. Not many of us get up every day and can't wait to get to work. And you also know what it took to get here and how many guys are in the minor leagues that want your job. And we also have 4 children, so there's plenty of motivation.
Well, there is always someone ready to come up and take your job.
There's always, and you know what? There are so many good guys down there that just haven't caught a break, and that's why I say
there are only so many teams. There's only so many slots available for people to broadcast.
And so that's why I say we're very blessed. We know that, and but I mean, we'd be also lying if there weren't certain games where you're like, John Miller said it best. Mark knows him very well from his Baltimore days. There are some 2.5-hour games that are too long, and there are some 4-hour games that aren't long enough. It really depends on the game.
Well, we were talking about people coming up, and Jim Rosenhaus is here with us too. Now, you are the color commentator, right? Is that what your title is, or I mean,
is
just
really
co-announcer, or what is it?
When he was negotiating, that's what he was.
Yeah. Well,
when he was negotiating extension.
Now, I don't know the story behind this, but I was just reading here, and so you had a 3-man broadcast team for a while, and then that third guy, he was working with you for a long time. Then they bring you in as a third guy. You do one season, and then that guy is out. So did you basically take that guy? I mean, was this like a year-long audition to replace that guy? I don't even know what that guy's name was, but.
Here's how that evolved.
He retired.
A couple of years ago,
Oh yeah.
A couple of years ago, we were in Texas, and I can only say it's good. The guy was okay, right? Eventually,
he was.
Guy falls out of the upper deck in Texas.
Yeah,
and Tom immediately thinks that it was me over there pushing Mike Keegan out of the upper deck. I was like, come on, Tom.
So did you? I mean, that guy must have felt when you come in as a third guy. The handwriting was on the wall, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
Oh, please, come on, give me a break.
Absolutely not.
No.
Those are the Jersey roots you talk about with Rosie on those September games.
Exactly, and I think Rover's got a little more insight to this than Rosie really wanted you to have.
And Mark Shapiro, the president of the Indians. What does that involve on a day-to-day basis? Because
this morning, Curtis Danberg told me I was coming here to judge a bikini contest. Otherwise, there's no chance I'd be on with you today.
Yeah, you are. Tom and Jim are just waiting to change into their bikinis.
That's a sight I don't need to see.
And then we'll judge which one's the better bikini broadcaster.
So, president of the team, this is my 22nd season with the Tribe.
Oh, wow.
And I've started in a cubicle with no title and ran the farm system in the mid-'90s and was GM for 9 years. And so now, as president, I oversee both the baseball and the business side. So,
so you start 22 years ago, and you said you had a little cubicle. What was your job 22 years ago?
My job was I sat right outside John Hart and Dan O'Dowd's office. I did everything from...
You were like an assistant or something?
I was like the generic assistant, entry level, slappy, just did everything from Xeroxing and filing to... I did a lot of the research on those multi-year contracts we did, the very first set of multi-year contracts. So I did a contract prep and things like that.
But you were a graduate of, I think, Princeton, right? So
I was, somehow.
At the time, were you like, oh my God, here I am. It's a good opportunity, but I'm making copies. I graduated from Princeton. I should be doing more than this.
I didn't. I woke up. I think some of the days when I was living in temporary housing downtown here in 1992, I did wake up and go. But it was a good. It was a good incentive to get into the office. I was working around baseball. A game I loved. I woke up every day and listened to John talk about the vision and where the team was going. I watched Jacobs Field get built.
Mm-hmm.
My first weekend in Reserve Square, staying downtown, they imploded the last building on the site. And I remember waking up thinking, earthquake, and what's going on here? And so that was kind of what I grew up around. And to hear about the team, the vision of the team and the vision of that ballpark, and then be part of that, and then have a chance to become general manager here and now president of the
Well,
team.
how do you work your way up? So you start as an assistant.
You do what Rosie did. You kill a lot of people along the way. No, I mean, I think I've always just had the approach. You learn, you listen, you earn respect, and when opportunities come, you try to do a better job than the expectation there. That's
because you really, I mean, if someone wants to come in and become a general manager or a president or whatever, I mean, what kind of experience do you have to have?
It's different for. There's no one set of experiences. Everybody's different. Some guys are ex-players. Some guys are guys that have a business acumen and expertise. But you better be able to bring something to the table that contributes. And I was just fortunate to be there at a time when we were growing rapidly, and John Hart empowered me and gave me a lot of opportunity. He continued to give me more, and I tried to exceed the expectations. And my foundation's in player development. It's in the farm system. It's in Latin America. That's where I cut my teeth in baseball, and in learning and running that system for 7 or 8 years. And that's still, when I go back and think about what I love about the game, minor league baseball, and going back to those are my roots in the game.
So your father was he was an agent, right?
He was, among other things, yeah. Of Cal Ripken Jr. and Kirby Puckett and Brooks
Is that
Robinson.
what got you interested in it?
My dad's love for the game of baseball, and growing up with a guy that wiffle ball, stick ball, it didn't matter. We were outside playing catch with the duct taped up baseball,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, I'm the kid with going to games with my dad, hanging over the railing trying to get autographs. Then I turned 12. And my dad helps Brooks Robinson, who was a Hall of Fame third baseman out of bankruptcy. Brooksy says, "Will you negotiate my last contract?" My dad becomes a guy that negotiates contracts. I went from being the fan to those guys being in my house.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, I'm idolizing Eddie Murray. To Eddie Murray's walking through my living room. And so if you can imagine what that does for a kid when you're 12, 13 years old who loves baseball.
Sure.
And you're starting to be around these guys. But what it did for me also is just establish that standard of what a great player is and the way they handle themselves and how they feel about the game and what it means to be a professional. And those are things I still take with me to this day.
Do you, speaking of how players handle themselves, I know it's a little bit different in football, but, well, speaking of football has become such a huge part of American culture. Baseball used to be, the national pastime, and everyone would talk about, but the NFL has exploded. Does Major League Baseball try to combat that in any sort of way?
That's a great question. So football is a sport that is made for television. I mean, when you really watch it, even when you go to the games now, you feel like you can sense, and they've done a masterful job from scheduling to the production on television. They've just done a great job. So I think baseball needs to think about the younger fan. Baseball, the majority of the fan base happens to be, white men 50 and over, and baseball needs it. Now, there are still
they're all dying, so you need to, in seriousness, the older people get, you need to.
No, baseball needs to think about that. I do think that there is some effort now to engage and work to engage younger fans. But until we aggressively do that, and here's the great challenge, that part of what makes baseball great is the tradition. Part of what makes baseball great is the game doesn't change. I think one of the coolest things about baseball, unlike basketball and football, you go back and watch footage from 1930, 1940 in baseball, same game. Largely, other than the fabric of the uniforms, it's not that different. You go back and watch basketball from 50 years ago or football from 50 years ago, totally different games. And that's one of the cool things about baseball is you can compare players.
Well, how do you get the young kids into it without, turning it into like MMA where you get to first base and if you're thrown out, you can just fight the guy that, maybe you're safe.
I think technology is one way, and then ultimately it's players like Bryce Harper, guys like that who can young kids can relate to and gravitate towards. You see a kid like Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, those guys, they represent players that young kids growing up can identify with, and I think ultimately they need to carry the brand for baseball.
Tom Hamilton, Jim Rosenhaus, and Mark Shapiro are here. Tom and Jim are from the broadcast team. Indians games will now be heard here on WMMS. Tom, how did you get into? Is this something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, I was farm boy from Wisconsin and loved playing, and everybody I think that plays wants to be a major league player. And, at some point you usually find out early in your life that you're not going to be good enough, and so this seemed like the next best thing.
How did you start? You just start basically
I
announcing for a little
went to
dinky
college,
team?
and then I started about as low as you can start. I was living in Shell Lake, Wisconsin. It wasn't a basement. It was a cellar of the mother of the radio station's owner.
Yeah.
So that's how I started, and doing high school games, and from that point just kind of worked your way up. Watertown, Wisconsin, Appleton, and then finally got to Milwaukee and Columbus, and then Columbus was the big break doing AAA. So, did a lot of bartending, delivered magazines. You did whatever you could to make ends meet, but the goal was to maybe someday get lucky enough to get a big league job.
How does it work on a technical standpoint? Are they just feeding you guys stats? Is there someone that's telling you guys stuff constantly, or how does this work when you're doing a game?
I think it's called homework. We do have a multitude of stats, and Rosie can attest to this. The higher up you go in the food chain, as far as from high school to college to minor leagues, whatever, the more stuff you have available.
Mm-hmm.
The hard jobs are doing high school games with nothing available. We have too many stats now, so now it's kind of up to you to decipher what's important or not important. I think that's why the key is you go down, you talk to players, you talk to coaches, you talk to scouts, try to bring something to the broadcast other than stats.
So how much research are you doing? You've been doing this for so long. Do you need to do research before
Sure.
each game or each series?
To me, it's an ongoing thing. Even during the off season, there's stuff that you see that you file away to use during the course of the year. And to me, but it's the longer you do it, obviously, you remember players from year to year, that type of thing. But I think the day you stop working is the day probably you lose your job.
Because I was telling a story earlier this morning. I was watching a Cubs game. Harry Carey was announcing. and he I guess he must have had some sort of, in his earpiece, it was turned up too loud, I guess. And so for a while, for like a whole half inning, you could hear everything that was piped into his ear being picked up on his microphone. So you would hear there was some guy, as each person came up to bat, there was just some guy. It was very brief.
Well, that's television.
228 in hitting positions. And then so Harry Carey, he'd just be having the conversation, and whatever that guy said, he would then work it in, he's batting 228 with runners in scoring positions, like he had just come up with that. Now, do you guys have anything similar to that?
Maybe Rosie does. I know I don't.
I think Tom's right. And you have to do it before the game, because once the game gets started, things start happening too quickly. If you don't have it down before the game, it's kind of like studying for 162 final exams. And you can't cram it in, just 2 hours before the game. You do have to keep up with it throughout the year and from day to day.
I can tell you, because these guys would probably be more humble, and I would venture to say it's the same for you or anyone else that's successful. People like to think successful people are just lucky. There's no such thing.
I got by on my beauty.
Prepared.
It was my beauty, actually. I just skated my way into this job.
Preparation, guys that succeed and women that succeed prepare, and they are focused, and they clearly have a discipline to it. You walk into the booth with those guys, and you can see the preparation out in front of them. You watch the time they get to the ballpark. They're not showing up at 6:45 or 6:30. They're getting there for batting practice. They're talking to the coaches around the cages. They're talking to the players in the clubhouse, and all that on a scale of not just 162 games. Spring training's another 30 days they're there.
Right.
So they're around those guys for 210 days. And all those things go into making a successful, game broadcast every single night.
Some people want to talk to you guys quickly on the phone. 1-866-YO-ROVER. That's 1-866-967-6837. Tom Hamilton, Jim Rosenhaus, and Mark Shapiro from the Indians are here. Opening day is on April 8th against the Yankees, and you'll be able to hear that game right here on WMMS. And almost all of the games, I think the middle of the day games are not going to be broadcast here on WMMS. So I want to say out of, what is it, do you guys know, 140 some games are going to be heard on this station? I don't know.
That sounds right.
Well, it sounds, if you don't know, just pretend that you do, and it sounds sounds good to me. 140 games.
You know what I'm
right
waiting
here.
for? I'm waiting for that guy in my ear to tell me. No, it's 141.
Craig, you're on Rover's Morning Glory. Good morning, Craig.
Hey, good morning, guys.
Hey.
Hey, I got a question for Mr. Shapiro. I was a big fan of the movie Moneyball, and being a Clevelander, it was really cool seeing all the Cleveland references, and I saw that you were actually portrayed in the movie. My question is, how accurate of a portrayal of you was that? And then I forget the Jonah Hill character,
Right.
but what was it like working with him? I mean, did you know what he was going to eventually be? And then do you think that manager of the GM of the Oakland A's really changed baseball?
Wow, that's a long question. You know, in the beginning of movies, when they say based upon a true story, it should say very loosely based upon a true story. You know, so Moneyball, it was an interesting education for me. They asked me to approve the script. I kind of read it and said, what do you guys want me to approve? This is fiction. And I was like, whatever, no problem. Basically, when you condense what happens over a 5-year period down to 90 minutes, you've got to take a lot of liberties and find vehicles to tell your story and make it interesting. And that story was about Billy Beane, the general manager of the A's, who clearly is a very, first of all, he's a good friend of mine, very bright guy, did some things to advance the game from the way we make decisions about players. Not the only guy. There were other people that did as well. But no, you know, I wasn't even GM yet. You know, the guy that Peter Brandt's name is actually Paul DePodesta. He's the assistant GM of the Mets now. He's a guy we hired as an intern, and then I recommended to Billy. So, you know, there's some things about it. It was fun. I wish my office looked like that office. I don't have 8 guys standing around behind me when I make a decision.
Has it changed the way that people go out and get players, look at players? Has that changed?
There was a sea change in the way decisions were made, the amount of information that was utilized, the amount of analysis and data that went into decision making. Part of that was pushed by the Oakland A's, but there were 3 or 4 other teams. And then since that time, you know, those things change all the time. So what went into that movie and the decisions that were made, that's been advanced tenfold now. And now the amount of information that we get on every single game, on every single pitch, and there are you know, we have an analytics department, just a department of people that are just analysts that are MIT and Stanford and Yale and smart guys that just look for information to try to find inefficiencies and try to find that we can exploit to make decisions and have competitive advantages.
Everyone wants a winning team, obviously, especially here in this town. What's the biggest hurdle that the Indians have to winning a championship?
MLB system. The MLB system of just revenue sharing, you know, it's different from every other professional sport. I tend not to talk about it because it becomes a built-in excuse if you talk about it.
Well, you'll have to explain it to me a little bit because I don't know exactly what you mean by it.
So,
I mean, give me a rough outline of it.
Well, I mean, the simplest explanation is the teams, you basically you're evaluated on the same scale, right? Wins and losses.
Right.
Every team's evaluated. But there are teams whose revenues support payrolls of 3 or 4 times what the Indians are. And when I say that, it's
like
not
the Yankees.
Yankees, Dodgers now with a $7 billion television contract, $7 billion. So, you know, it's, you know, the exponential amount of revenue they receive from that, because they don't share all of that. They only share a portion of that. So the reality is that about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, a couple of the big market teams started to understand not only if we deploy this money in free agency, but if we use it to hire scouts, if we hire more analysts in the front office, if we, you know, get better strength and conditioning systems, if we have better facilities. So, you know, we are dealing with on an uneven playing field. Again, that's just the system. The more I talk about that, the more it becomes an excuse for our organization why we shouldn't succeed. In 2007, we had the most wins in the major leagues and played a team with 2.5 times our payroll in the playoff. We knocked the Yankees out of the playoffs. It can still happen, you know, but it is certainly a greater challenge.
Do you realize why you actually did not get to the World Series that year? There's actually a connection to this show. And it has to do with my phone screener, dumb back there, the guy who was pitching against the Red Sox, I think is Fausto Carmona. I think
used
was
to
his
be.
name.
Now it's Roberto Hernandez.
Oh, so that's a guy that was that was like the guy with the whole fake identity and whatnot. See, I don't keep up with all of this, all this nonsense.
Jim Rosenhaus recently changed his identity as well.
So this guy he was really older than he was.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he's a victim. I mean, a lot of the Buscones, who are kind of an agent in the Dominican Republic, they take these young kids and they do whatever it takes to get them signed.
Yeah,
so,
you'd rather sign a 17-year-old kid than a 22-year-old guy.
Because you're basing your decision on projection.
Right.
You're projecting the potential.
So if you're 22 and you're in the Dominican Republic, you just say,
90.
"Yeah, I'm 15." Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible. When I first started going to the Dominican, the birth certificates and the registry was a leather-bound book, Rover. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It wasn't not a computer system. It was a leather-bound book.
So one of these guys would be able to basically juice grease someone's palms and be able to get a fake certificate or something like that.
There was a lot of that going on. There was a lot of corruption, from top to bottom.
So what happened to this Fausto Carmona guy?
He is now Roberto Hernandez.
Yeah, okay, so he's Roberto Hernandez, and he's playing.
He signed with the Tampa Bay Rays this year, a free agent contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was getting ready to pitch. All you guys needed to do is win that game.
That's true, yeah.
The morning of that game, my phone screener goes on, and what was the story, Dom? You outed him for having was it an affair or what?
It wasn't an affair. He was just in a relationship with a chick I knew, and it was kind of on the DL, and he was telling her to keep it on the DL, and I didn't think that was a cool thing to do.
So Dom comes in, and he tells this story about what a creep scumbag this guy is. And he's pitching later tonight in this game that you guys ultimately lost or did not go through.
Dome.
Well, that guy... He did not call into us, but he was up calling this girl saying, "How could you have outed me? I told you not to say we were sleeping." Because this guy had, I think, a bunch of different chicks or whatever. And he was
shocking.
So this is at 7:00 in the morning, and this guy is, pitching 12 hours later. He's now livid, going out of his mind.
Yeah, sorry, Indians
He
fans.
gets out on the mound. And you remember this, Tom. He sucks, right?
He didn't last long.
That's right. And the reason, so that guy right there, that phone screener is the reason you guys didn't go to the World Series.
Can we hand out his address and cell phone number?
It's already been done. There's always next year, guys.
So it's the revenue share that's the biggest.
If you ask me what is the single largest challenge that we have to face, it's just the inherent size of this market combined with the revenue sharing system.
So if you could have one thing, whether it's realistic or not,
payroll parity. Without a question. Yeah.
Isn't there like some sort of salary cap or anything?
There's a luxury tax, but not a salary cap in baseball. But it only taxes 2 or 3 teams, and not as significant.
And not even enough to where they even care. They go, we're going to pay this luxury tax because it's going to make us win, and we're going to make a lot of money.
So you've got football where they share almost all revenue, and you've got baseball where they just share a much smaller percentage, and it's a system that's very tough to change. I mean, I'm on a lot of those committees.
Because if you're one of those guys that owns the Yankees or whatever,
right.
You don't want this system
to change. Well, it would
change
your franchise value. How complex. And we play 162 games instead of 16, so it's hard. So you've got local revenue, local radio and television contracts, and ballpark revenue, and then you've got a national television contract. In the other sports, the national contract is a much higher percentage. In baseball, it's a small, it's only a piece of what our revenue picture is. So you just base it strictly on households, right? The number of households in New York, households in all of New England, the whole region, versus the number of households in Cleveland. And your contracts are directly tied to that, as well as your number of people that come to the ballpark are a percentage of that.
Right. 1-866-YO-ROVER. These guys have got to get going in just a moment. But we did announce earlier this morning that Indians games will be heard here on WMMS. They'll continue to be heard.
And that Rover's going to join the booth as a 3-man team.
That's right. I'm going to push Jim out. Handwriting's on the wall, Jim.
I understand.
Or maybe I'll push Tom out. I mean, you've been doing this a long time. How long's your contract for, Tom?
That's a good question.
How many more years do you have?
He's got a long time.
I think
he might be the
more.
longest contracted employee in Progressive.
Who do you negotiate that with? You negotiate that with Mark?
Well, it's ironic, Rover, but for a long time, Mark's dad was my agent.
Oh, well, that's a conflict of interest. Boy, you're a real idiot. How do I hire Tom Hamilton and start doing some deals with him? Because his dad's going to go, hey, this is a great deal Mark's offering you.
No, I now run everything through my wife.
Yeah.
So
she's much tougher than you are, right? Yeah.
By the way, I've lost every negotiation with my dad ever. Allowance, curfew, I've lost it all.
But you're an employee of the Indians then,
Yes.
right? So
Yep.
you guys are employees of the Indians and you
Right.
negotiate. Now, is that so you're really the guy who handles all of that then, right, Mark?
Well, I
mean,
oversee
from
all
top
that.
to bottom.
I'm not directly doing all that. So Curtis Damberg, who oversees our communications department, he did the deal with Clear Channel to bring us to MMS. I'm certainly involved in all of that and overseeing all of that.
Now,
But,
do you guys? What do you, Tom, consider now the flagship of Indians baseball? Do you still consider WTAM, the AM station, the flagship of Indians
Careful,
baseball?
it depends on which morning show we're on.
Well, for instance, for Browns games, if you look at the ratings, something like 80% of the people who are listening to Browns games are listening here. Now, WTAM also runs it, but again, if you have the option available between FM and AM, unless you're 1,000 years old, you're going to listen on FM, right? So I would consider this station the flagship station for Indians baseball. I mean, in all seriousness, because we're going to have the big audience.
How about Clear Channel as the flagship partner of the Cleveland Indians?
See,
I love how Mark
you're
jumps in
above
there.
my pay scale right now with some of these
I'm throwing him a
questions.
life preserver. It's Clear Channel, Hammy.
Clear Channel.
Do you guys? Is it tougher to make deals if you're not winning as a team? Is it tougher to negotiate broadcast rights and things like that?
You mean, listen, it's always easier when you're winning. But also you go in and you're negotiating with people that know that it's cyclical and know that it could change during the tenure of a contract and know that there's still a value to the programming because of how avid the fans are in Cleveland. But, yeah, you have more leverage. Listen, hey, leverage is better when you're winning. No question about it.
Let me go to Bob. Let me just go through a few people, and then I'll let you guys go. But a few people on the phone want to talk. 1-866-YO-ROVER. Bob, you're on Rover's Morning Glory with Tom Hamilton, Jim Rosenhaus, and Mark Shapiro from the Indians, the two guys from the broadcast booth, and the president of the Indians. Bob, go ahead.
Hi, guys. How you doing?
Good.
Thanks.
Good. Hey, nice job this winter, Mark. You guys did a good job. But two questions. One, why didn't we go after Dan Heron and Napoli a little more harder? I mean, you know their situation and the contracts they got. I thought they would be cheap contracts with a huge upside.
I love when someone gives you a compliment, but then you hear "but" afterwards. That's always good. No, so I think both those guys, we were in heavily on Napoli. I don't know how closely you followed that. He signed it. He agreed to a 3-year deal and then failed the physical and was back down to a 1-year deal. So all I would say about both Heron and Napoli is that, because of the situation we talked about earlier, we are a little more risk averse. We're a little more careful at measuring risk. So when it comes to guys that have medical histories, which both of those guys have, we tend to be a little more careful or try to be a little more careful in what we do. So, and again, there are times we take a jump, like with Grady Sizemore last year. We still felt like his upside was the highest in the market despite his injury history, and that, we knew the guy and placed a premium on that. And he never played, and it didn't have an at-bat for us last year. So it doesn't always work out. But in both those cases, we were in heavily on Napoli, backed out when it went to 3 years. And, injury played a factor in our decision.
Do you get tired of people? I mean, everyone is an armchair critic of your moves.
Yeah, I think, listen, that's just part of the deal. I think that's a good thing, right? Everyone thinks.
Have you ever read anything like on a message board? Like if you go to the newspaper, Cleveland.com, and they post an article on the Indians, there's a whole
stuff underneath
comments.
the articles?
Right, the whole comments. Have you ever read anything on there and gone, maybe that guy's right? Have you ever seen anything on there that made sense?
Absolutely. But I usually don't make it too far down those before
maybe
I stop reading them.
Maybe if you found out who that was and then you hire the guy, they could make a whole movie out of that. The guy who's found on a message board teaches Mark Shapiro how to run a team. And A
lot of people want to teach me how to run a team.
What's the biggest mistake you've ever made in the Indians?
I think, it's funny. You go back and you think about different trades you made. I think there's one trade we made. It was not a famous trade, but for a situational left-handed reliever, and we traded Ryan Church and Mace Stories to the Expos. It was after trading, Bartolo Colon for Cliff Lee, Grady Sizemore, and Brandon Phillips. That was a pretty good trade. So Scott Stewart was the guy's name. It's a smaller deal, and you try to learn from every deal, and I think at that point, everyday players for middle relievers is not something that I think are good trades. I learned that from Giles for Rincon as an assistant GM, and then I had that kind of accentuated in the Scott Stewart deal.
Tom, what do you think the biggest mistake he's made has been?
Signing Jim Rosenhaus.
Yeah, I don't get caught up in that again, Rover, just because, you can't be 100% right, just like those of us on the air. I mean, I'm sure there are days you walk out of here and you go, I don't know if I should have said that. There are nights I come home, my wife goes, we do have 4 kids that still have to get through college. You may want to watch that.
You may not want to answer this question then.
Yeah.
Well, how do you temper? I mean, do you ever have to, if you just see a move that you think is idiotic or something like that, do you have to temper what you say? Because you are an employee of the
Rover,
Indians organization.
And this doesn't really involve Mark. It did from the standpoint he got stuck with the dirty work, and I'll never forget it because we're on the road, and Mark knows where I'm probably going with this. I had said it in an interview before it ever happened, not thinking it would ever happen. But John Hart, who had a tremendous run here, traded for John Rocker. And I thought at the time, and I said, I don't get it. Now that was all I said because at the end of the day, it's not my call. It's not up for me to be God, judge, and jury in the radio booth.
Let me tell you, Rover, so I was on the road with the club as assistant GM. We traded for Rocker, and Wickman was our closer. I don't know if you remember these guys or not. So John tells me, hey, you got to sit down with Wiki. You got to tell Wiki he's not going to be the closer anymore with Charlie Manuel. You got to meet with Rocker. Curtis happened to be with us too as a number 2 guy. It was his first time on the road with the big league club, I think. And so we're sitting there, and he goes, you got to prep Rocker for the media. It'll be softball questions. It's Kansas City media. It's not New York. He had just said the famous line about the subway, don't ride the subway.
Homos and whatever he said.
So, we're walking, and, first of all, I know he walks into Charlie Manuel's office with a big tumbler full of, vodka straight up on ice, and I'm sitting there looking at the guy, and he is, I'll be fine. Don't worry about me. I'll be all right. No question. And, we talk, hey, they're going to try to bait you with this. They're going to try to bait you with that. He goes through the first 2 or 3 questions, no problem. He handles them great. And then someone asks him a question about, hey, we're going back to New York next week. Easily could have handled that one easily, too. How do you feel? Hey, it's still going to be 60 feet, 6 inches. And he starts going like on a long, and I'm like, I look at Curtis. Curtis looks at me, and we're like, holy cow, this guy, he fed off that controversy, he fed off that attention. And
you realize that when you go in and you talk to a player and you say, listen, handle it this way, they don't want to hear that from you. You know that
some
they hate
guys
that,
do.
right?
I mean, listen, some guys want you to prepare them. They're thinking, hey, I can benefit from the things this guy's seen, he's been through. I can benefit from kind of rehearsing, the questions I might get asked because I get a better chance to give so some guys want the Bull Durham, answers. Other guys, they want to be authentic. They want to be themselves. And to be honest with you, I'm okay with that.
You ever get pissed off at the media, Mark?
Do I ever get pissed off at the media? I think there's a lack of accountability sometimes. You're allowed to say one thing and never get held to it, whereas we have accountability. I think that will bother me at times, but you can't last long if you're going to get up and down, if you're going to get angry at the media. They're doing a job. They have a job to do. So it never lasts long. I let go of it pretty quickly.
Tom, what'd you think about the Brent Musburger? I know it's football again, but he talks about that chick, and he's like, oh, that chick's so hot, and people were bent out of shape about that.
Yeah. Again, I agree with you on that.
It was a little
Rover.
uncomfortable to watch him, though.
Yeah, it was kind of like, bringing home a hot girl and your grandpa won't let you sit next to her because he is, it's like, but I think too much was made of it. But, I do Big Ten basketball for the Big Ten Network. Mm-hmm. They do not allow the camera people to ever show any kind of a good-looking female, anybody in provocative clothing, just because they got sued one time. This actually was when I was doing the games for ESPN Regional. It was during a commercial break. Cameramen were doing what cameramen do, and they started talking, and then a female employee filed a suit. So I learned a long time ago from that You just do the game. You don't start, that there's certain areas
so
you don't
cover
go.
You cover the mic when you turn to Jim and you go, man, look at that chick's teats over there. Wow, what a great
You know
rack.
what, Rover, my eyes never leave the pitcher's mound and the batter's box. But when you see Rosie in the booth with binoculars, he's not checking who's warming up in the bullpen.
Have the Indians ever come to you, Tom, and made a comment about something you've said during a game?
Yeah, that's probably why I've been here 24 years, is because they realize you have to have credibility. Now I have to be smart about it, and again, I think you always learn that, you're not, Herb taught me a long time ago, you're not God, judge, and jury in the booth, but you also, if somebody's not playing well or not hustling or whatnot, you have to point that out. Otherwise, every time you say a guy made a great play, fans are like, yeah, whatever, everybody makes,
Right.
But yeah, there was one time in particular, that's when I knew how popular he was. Slider was in the upper deck and jumping up and down, and the upper deck is jumping up and down. It's got nothing to do with the ball game. And it was a good ball game, and I got irritated, and I go, well, I'm sure sorry this game's getting in the way of whatever the heck Slider's doing upstairs. And the next day, our executive vice president, said, you know what, don't be calling out Slider on the air. It's like, honest to gosh, that's
Slider's Mafia. It's always there.
Like I say, there are times you leave the booth and you go like, I wish I wouldn't have said that, or I probably went too far with that. But the Indians have been great about that, and I think you also have to be smart about it. There are certain broadcasters out there that say things I wouldn't dream of saying.
Well, you certainly didn't. I won't play the clip. I had it ready to go, but I won't play it just for the sake of time. The clip where you bash Clear Channel, and they had
Clear Channel.
Yes. Should I play it and refresh his memory, Charlie?
I have it right here.
All right, play it.
Oh, boy.
Here, play this quickly.
You can join us for another season of Indians baseball. Off day tomorrow, day games Saturday and Sunday. White Sox in town Monday and Tuesday nights, and Wednesday at noon. Now the 1-0. Hafner looks at ball 2 down low, and Aaron Sebia heads to the mound, and that gives us a chance to thank a very special lady who has been with us for so many years, Stephanie Hagel, who is no longer running the network, but I know all of you along the Indians radio network know what a sensational worker Stephanie Hagel
This was the board op. You basically, and then you go basically go on. You go, I don't know what these guys over there at Clear Channel are thinking. This was a board op
I think
that was
Curtis did say something to me the next day.
and she was running the games, and then there were all sorts of errors. Let me tell you behind the scenes.
You know what though? That probably is an area I shouldn't have gone. But she was so loyal to us, I felt a sense of loyalty to her.
I have no problem with it. I think that's great. I'm glad that you did that.
But that was an area I shouldn't have gone.
Let me give you some behind the scenes information on this. So the story is that they had this person who would run the broadcast here back at the radio station, and like if you guys were doing whatever, recaps or whatever, she had to actually hit play, and it was a whole involved process. Clear Channel goes, you know what? We need to cut some budget. We'll get rid of people. Anyone can run in there and do that job. That's easy. You just hit a button.
Yeah.
Well, then they put someone in there and they figured out, it's not that easy. There's actually, what do you mean? They're recording stuff. They're doing this. They're communicating with people. This is actually a lot harder than it is. So I think they were caught off guard by that. But I like it because there were a couple of times where there was a screw up and you actually called them out. That's good. So I didn't know, man. I thought maybe you guys might have been pissed off with Clear Channel. You weren't going to get this deal done, Mark.
There is no perfect relationship, but when you have a 15-year partnership, there's the things you like, the things you don't like. The great thing about negotiating a new contract, you have a chance to bring all those things up and try to get the foundation right for the next 5 years.
Right.
And I think we did that. So, I would say this to you. Listen, for anyone to be good at, effective at communicating, they need to be authentic. And so Hammy, his emotion and his energy and the passion and the way he calls a game, you are authentic in here. No one's putting reins on you and saying, don't go here, don't go there. Part of that means you're going to get bit sometimes too, and you're not always going to like everything you hear. You're not always going to like everything. I'd like to have Jim and Hammy up there with pom-poms, just saying about the positive things, but I expect them to call out players and to call out anybody else if they see something that's not done right. That's part of it, and they're there as a conduit to our fans. They're not there to make us feel better about the job we're doing.
What's your prediction before I let you go? What's your prediction for this season, Mark?
Pain. No, you know what that is, by the way? Clubber Lang. No one knows that. What's your prediction for the fight?
Rocky. This is a Rocky reference.
You said, what's your prediction for the fight?
I go, wow, Mark's being really honest. It's going to be pain once again for Cleveland.
Just reminded me, I just watched some movie with my 10-year-old son. What's your prediction for the fight? Clubber, pain.
He was just talking about authenticity. Another season of pain for the fans. This guy is authentic. I like it.
No, I mean, listen, our jobs are to kind of always think about what could go wrong, keep trying to address and get better. I think we will be better this year. I feel fairly confident of that, even though there are a bunch of variables that enter into it.
Well, you started out good last year and then sort of petered out.
But even behind...
Do heads roll when that starts happening? I mean...
Well, we changed pitching coaches and we changed managers at the end of the year, so I think that's the answer to your question.
Middle, but like in the middle of this. When this starts, do you go down there and go, what the hell? What the hell's going on?
Yelling and screaming doesn't help. You tirelessly look for why. Unfortunately, even when we were doing well, a lot of the things we were seeing behind the scenes led us to believe, hey, I don't know if we can sustain it the way we're doing it, but the reality that Chris and I were talking about, Chris Antonetti and I were like, hey, I know we can't sustain it the way we're doing it, but we are where we are. Now we need to figure out a way to ensure we get, start playing better.
How much impact does the manager have on the effectiveness of the team?
Very good question. So from a game strategy standpoint, probably the bullpen management's the most important area that a manager can impact. But a manager has huge ability to impact what goes on in the clubhouse. To me, it's the most appropriate title in all of professional sports, right? Manager, that's what he's doing. He's got 25 players. He's got a huge support staff, trainer, medical staff, strength and conditioning staff, clubhouse equipment guys, video guys. He's got to know what's going on, have a pulse of that. Every single day there's going to be 10 or 15 problems. Maybe it's a girlfriend problem. Maybe it's two players not getting along, injury issues. He's got to decide, I only have time to deal with about 3 or 4 today. What are the 3 or 4 most important ones? The good managers know which 3 or 4 to deal with each day. The guys who are not effective managers aren't able to prioritize which ones to deal with, and then they undermine the team's ability. So I think from a standpoint of ensuring that problems don't derail the team's performance in the field, a manager is crucial to that, as well as managing the bullpen is an extremely important area too.
All right, so your prediction is how many wins? Give me the number of wins. How many wins?
I don't do that. I don't do that.
And then I'll get you back here next year and I'll beat you up for it if we don't.
You won't get me. You can get me back here, but you won't get me to give you a number of wins.
All right, Tom.
You know what? And Herb taught me that 24 years ago. That's why you play the game. There's one thing about sports that's so different than life.
It's a great part of baseball.
You can't predict it. But what I will say is, without question, Rover, I think this is a ball club that can contend. And that's what you want going to spring training. I'll be honest, I didn't think that last year because I wasn't crazy. I wasn't going to say it publicly. I just wasn't crazy about what we had done in the offseason. I thought this offseason was off the charts. And because of that, I think we're way better than we were a year ago. I think we are better than we were 2 years ago when we kind of caught lightning in a bottle for 2 months. I think this is more sustainable. And if you can just stay in this thing now for the first 3-4 months, that's when you've got a chance. What has happened in the past is that we've petered out come June and July. I don't think that'll happen with this year's ball club.
Jim, here's your time to one-up both these guys. Give me a number. Come on, have some balls. Let's hear it.
If you had told me heading into last season that we wouldn't win 70 games, I'd have said you're crazy, and that didn't happen. So.
Now, you guys sound so official when you talk. Do you ever make love to your wife in that voice?
Baby, come over here. I'm going to give it to you tonight.
Is that how it is?
I don't want to hear the answer to that. I don't want to have that vision. I don't want that visual. I really don't.
All right. Well, I'll let these guys go change into the bikini, so you're going to judge them on later. Thank you guys for coming in.
Thank you,
Tom Hamilton and Jim Rosenhaus and Mark Shapiro.
We're excited to be on MMS. So,
well, we're excited to have you. I think it's going to be great. It's going to, just the audio quality I've talked about, but I think it's really going to enhance the broadcast. You'll be able to hear so much more.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not knocking
Think
AM,
about
but
Hammy's home run call on FM.
that's right. Yes, it's going to be so much
way
clearer.
back.
That's right. But I think it's a good thing for everyone involved. I think it's going to be good for this radio station and good for the Indians. And it was good having you guys come back again sometimes too.
Yeah, man.
Now that you're on
invite
here,
us.
you
Well,
guys
happy
have
to. Now we can.
come back and appreciate it once again, you guys. I'm going to take a quick break. We will be right back on Rover's Morning Glory. Hang on.
Rover's Morning Glory.